The small town of Maple Creek was quiet and modest, nestled in the heart of the countryside. Life here moved at a slow, unhurried pace, and for Daniel, it was a life of endless struggle. He lived in a tiny, rundown cabin with a leaking roof and creaking floorboards. His days were spent doing odd jobs around the town, barely earning enough to keep himself fed. Despite the hardships, Daniel had one constant source of strength: Elena, his first love. She worked at the local diner, serving coffee and pie to the town's regulars, but her dreams were much bigger than Maple Creek. Still, she stayed for Daniel. Elena was the kind of woman who didn't hesitate to give her all for the people she loved. Her light brown eyes held a quiet determination, and her soft laugh had a way of brightening even the darkest days. She had been by Daniel's side since they were teenagers, standing firm through every trial life threw at them. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel sat on the porch of his cabin, his head in his hands. Elena approached with 2 steaming mugs of coffee, setting one down in front of him before sitting beside him. "You look like you've been carrying the weight of the world," she said softly, her voice laced with concern. Daniel sighed. I don't know how much longer I can do this, Elena. Every time I take one step forward, life pushes me 2 steps back. I'm tired of feeling like a failure." Elena placed a gentle hand on his shoulder. "You're not a failure, Daniel. You're the hardest working man I know. And you're not in this alone. Whatever happens, I'm here. We'll get through it together." Her words were a balm to his weary soul. Over the years, Elena had sacrificed so much for him, working extra shifts to help him buy tools for his carpentry, giving up opportunities so she could stay close to him, and even dipping into her small savings to help him keep the electricity on. But as much as Daniel loved her, he couldn't shake the feeling that Maple Creek was holding him back. He needed more. He needed to leave, to find a place where his dreams of becoming a renowned architect could come true. "I've been thinking," Daniel began hesitantly, breaking the silence. "There's nothing left for me here, Elena. I need to go. To the city. It's the only way I can make something of myself." Elena's expression faltered, but she quickly masked her fear with a supportive smile. "Then you should go," she said. "I'll be here, waiting for you." "Are you sure?" Daniel asked, guilt tugging at his heart. "I don't know how long it'll take, but I'll come back for you, Elena. I promise." She nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "I trust you, Daniel. Just don't forget about me." The city was a sprawling, chaotic maze of opportunity and despair. Daniel arrived with little more than a backpack and a head full of dreams. For weeks, he struggled to find his footing, taking on labor-intensive jobs that left him exhausted and discouraged. It was during one of these jobs, delivering furniture to an upscale office building, that he met Sophia. She was a striking woman in her early 30s, with sharp features and an air of confidence that commanded attention. Sophia was the head of a successful marketing agency, and her quick wit and charm made her a force to be reckoned with. Their first encounter was brief. Daniel had accidentally dropped a file from one of the desks he was delivering to, and Sophia noticed his embarrassed attempt to pick it up. "You're new around here, aren't you?" she asked, her voice smooth and self-assured. Daniel straightened up, nodding. "Yes, ma'am. Just trying to find my way." Sophia raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "You don't seem like the typical delivery guy. What's your story?" That was the beginning of their connection. Over time, Sophia took an interest in Daniel, not just as an acquaintance, but as a potential protege. She saw ambition in him, a hunger for success that reminded her of herself in her early years. She began offering him advice, introducing him to people in her circle, and even giving him a chance to work at her agency in an entry-level position. As Daniel's career began to take off, his relationship with Sophia deepened. She became his mentor, his confidant, and eventually his lover. But Daniel's heart was heavy with the weight of his deception. Back in Maple Creek, Elena still believed in his promise to return. They kept in touch through sporadic phone calls and letters, but Daniel found himself lying more and more often. "Are you seeing anyone?" Sophia asked one evening, as they shared a quiet dinner in her penthouse apartment. "No," Daniel replied quickly, the lie slipping out before he could stop it. Sophia smiled, reaching across the table to take his hand. "Good, because I think there's something special between us, Daniel. Something worth building on." Daniel's life in the city took a sharp turn after Sophia's influence. With her help, he gained a stable job at her marketing agency and quickly earned recognition for his creativity and determination. For the first time, Daniel felt like he was on the path to achieving the life he had always dreamed of. But success came at a cost he didn't fully comprehend yet. Months turned into years, and Daniel's life became a whirlwind of deadlines, meetings, and social events. The simple, grounded man from Maple Creek slowly faded into the background as he adapted to the fast-paced, cutthroat world of the city. His clothes became tailored, his mannerisms polished, and his ambitions sharper than ever. Sophia was at his side through it all. Their relationship was a mixture of mentorship, partnership, and romance. She saw in him the potential to rise far beyond what even he could imagine, and she pushed him relentlessly toward that goal. But with each step forward, Daniel found it harder to look back at the life he had left behind. Elena's letters became less frequent. She still wrote to him about life in Maple Creek, how she had saved enough to open a small sewing shop, how she still went to the baobab tree sometimes, waiting for the day he would return. Daniel read each letter with a heavy heart, but rarely replied. When he did, his responses were brief and vague, always ending with the same hollow promise. "I'll come back for you, Elena. Just give me a little more time." But as his relationship with Sophia deepened, those words began to feel like a lie. Sophia was everything Daniel thought he wanted: strong, successful, and magnetic. She challenged him, inspired him, and made him feel like he belonged in the world of wealth and power he had always dreamed of. One evening, as they sat on the balcony of Sophia's penthouse, looking out over the glittering city skyline, she asked him a question that sent a chill down his spine. "Daniel," she said, her voice soft but firm, "are you ready to take the next step? To build a life with me?" Daniel hesitated, his mind racing. He loved Sophia, or at least he thought he did. She had given him so much, helped him become the man he was today. But in the depths of his heart, he knew there was a part of him that still belonged to Elena. I need some time to think about it," he said finally, avoiding her gaze. Sophia studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. "Time is a luxury, Daniel. You need to decide what you want before someone else makes the decision for you." Back in Maple Creek, Elena's patience was wearing thin. It had been 3 years since Daniel had left, and though she still held on to hope, doubt had begun to creep into her heart. She stood in her small sewing shop one afternoon, watching the rain fall outside the window. Business had been slow lately, but Elena didn't mind. She had never been in it for the money. Her heart was still tied to the man who had promised to return to her, even though that promise was beginning to feel like a distant memory. Her best friend, Lily, walked into the shop, shaking off the rain from her umbrella. "You're still waiting for him, aren't you?" she asked, her tone laced with both sympathy and frustration. Elena sighed, folding a piece of fabric on her work table. "He promised me, Lily. He said he'd come back." "And what if he doesn't?" Lily pressed. "What if he's out there living a whole new life without you? How long are you going to wait for a man who might not even be thinking about you anymore?" The words stung, but Elena refused to let them take root. "Daniel's not like that," she said quietly. "He wouldn't forget about me." But deep down, a small voice whispered that Lily might be right. Back in the city, Daniel's life was spiraling into a web of lies. Sophia had started asking more questions about his past, questions that made him uncomfortable. "Who was the girl you used to write to back then?" she asked one evening, casually flipping through an old box of his belongings she had stumbled upon. Daniel froze. "No one important," he said quickly, snatching the box away. Sophia narrowed her eyes but didn't push further. She knew there was more to the story, but she also knew how to play the long game. Meanwhile, Daniel's guilt was beginning to consume him. He hadn't spoken to Elena in months, and every time he thought about her, a wave of shame washed over him. He couldn't deny that he loved her, her unwavering support, her gentle patience, her quiet strength. But he also couldn't deny that he loved Sophia in a different way. She was his equal, his partner in ambition, the woman who had helped him rise to the top. Daniel felt like he was being torn apart. He knew he couldn't keep living this double life, but the thought of choosing one woman over the other filled him with dread. Elena sat by the window of her sewing shop, her hands resting on a half-finished dress. The sewing machine sat silent, forgotten, as her mind wandered. 3 years had turned into 4, and Daniel's letters had become scarce, then stopped altogether. She still remembered the sound of his promises beneath the stars that night by the old tree. "I'll come back for you." The words were etched into her heart, but they had begun to feel like faded ink, something that could be washed away with time. Her doubts became heavier one day when she overheard a conversation between two women at the local diner where she often stopped for coffee. "Did you hear about Daniel?" one of them whispered, leaning closer to her friend. "He's living in the city now, apparently doing very well for himself. I heard he's with some rich executive." Elena froze, her heart pounding in her chest. She hadn't heard Daniel's name spoken in public for years, and now this? She clenched her coffee cup so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "Who told you that?" the other woman asked. "My cousin works in the same office building as him. She saw him with the woman, a brunette, really glamorous. He's been with her for a while now." The rest of their conversation was drowned out by the roar of blood rushing in Elena's ears. She stood abruptly, almost knocking over her chair, and walked out of the diner without a word. That night, she sat by the old baobab tree, clutching the last letter Daniel had sent her. Tears blurred her vision as she reread the words for the 100th time. "I'll come back for you, Elena. Just give me a little more time." Was it all a lie? Her heart ached as she tried to piece together the truth. She had sacrificed so much for Daniel, believing in his dream, in their love. And now, it seemed like he had built a new life without her. Sophia prided herself on being a sharp, intuitive woman. It was what had made her so successful in her career. But lately, something about Daniel felt off. He was distracted, distant. He seemed uncomfortable whenever she brought up the topic of their future together. And then there was the box she had found, the one with letters from some woman named Elena. At first, she had dismissed it. Everyone had a past, after all. But as the weeks went by, Sophia couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. One evening, while Daniel was in the shower, she decided to do a little investigating. She opened his laptop, quickly navigating to his emails. There, buried among work correspondence and bills, was a name that caught her eye, Elena. Sophia's heart sank as she opened the emails, scanning the heartfelt messages from a woman who clearly still loved Daniel. The most recent email was from 6 months ago. It was short, almost desperate. "Daniel, why haven't I heard from you? Are you okay? Please tell me what's going on. I miss you. I still believe in us." Sophia felt a wave of anger and betrayal wash over her. How long had he been stringing this woman along? She closed the laptop just as Daniel walked back into the room, a towel wrapped around his waist. "What are you doing?" he asked, his tone guarded. "Who's Elena?" Sophia asked, crossing her arms. Daniel froze, his face paling. "Sophia, I can explain." "Explain what?" she snapped, her voice rising. "That you've been lying to me this whole time? That you've been keeping another woman waiting for you while you're here with me?" Daniel stumbled over his words, trying to find a way to calm her down. "It's not what you think. She's my past. I haven't seen her in years. But you're still in contact with her." Sophia shot back. "Do you have any idea how humiliating this is? I've been nothing but good to you, Daniel. I've built you up, given you everything, and this is how you repay me." Elena, unable to ignore the whispers about Daniel any longer, decided to take matters into her own hands. She used the last of her savings to travel to the city, determined to find the truth. When she arrived, the bright lights and towering skyscrapers felt overwhelming. She clutched a piece of paper with the address of Daniel's office, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and anticipation. As fate would have it, she arrived just as Daniel and Sophia were leaving the building together. They were laughing, walking side by side, looking every bit like a couple. Elena froze, her breath catching in her throat. "Daniel," she called out, her voice trembling. Daniel turned, his eyes widening in shock as he saw her standing there. Sophia followed his gaze, her expression darkening as realization dawned. "Elena, what are you doing here?" Daniel stammered, stepping forward. Elena's voice was barely above a whisper. "So it's true. You've been lying to me this whole time." Sophia crossed her arms, her eyes blazing with anger. "This is Elena," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. "The woman you've been stringing along while pretending to be committed to me?" "Wait, both of you. Please let me explain," Daniel pleaded, his hands raised in a gesture of surrender. "There's nothing to explain," Elena said, her voice breaking. "You promised me, Daniel. You told me you'd come back for me. I sacrificed everything for you. And I built everything for you." Sophia interjected, her voice sharp. "I gave you a life, a future, and this is how you treat me? By keeping another woman in the shadows." Daniel was silent, guilt written all over his face. He had no defense, no words that could undo the pain he had caused both women. The confrontation ended with Elena walking away in tears and Sophia slamming the door to her penthouse in Daniel's face. Alone in his apartment, Daniel sat in the dark, consumed by regret. He had loved both women in different ways, but his lies had destroyed everything. He had taken Elena's sacrifices for granted and betrayed Sophia's trust. And now he was left with nothing but the weight of his mistakes. Daniel sat on his couch, staring at the empty walls of his apartment. For the first time in years, the silence was deafening. Both Elena and Sophia were gone, and the weight of his choices pressed down on him like an anchor. He had loved them both in his own way, but his lies had shattered everything. He leaned forward, burying his face in his hands. "I have to fix this," he muttered to himself. "I can't let it end like this." Daniel knew that apologies alone wouldn't be enough. He had to show both women that he was willing to take responsibility for his actions. The first step was to go back to the beginning, to Elena, the woman who had sacrificed everything for him. Daniel returned to Maple Creek for the first time in years. The sight of the familiar streets, the small shops, and the old baobab tree sent a wave of nostalgia and guilt crashing over him. He thought of all the promises he had made to Elena under that tree, promises he had broken. He found her at her sewing shop, working quietly at her machine. Her once bright eyes now carried a weariness he hadn't seen before, and her smile, the one that used to light up his world, was gone. "Elena," he said softly, stepping inside. She looked up, her hands freezing mid-stitch. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The air was heavy with unspoken words and raw emotion. "What are you doing here, Daniel?" she finally asked, her voice calm but distant. "I came to apologize," he said, his voice trembling. "I came to tell you how sorry I am, for everything. For breaking my promises, for lying to you. You didn't deserve any of it." Elena set her work aside and folded her arms, her gaze piercing. "Do you think sorry is enough? Do you have any idea what you put me through, Daniel? I waited for you. I gave up everything because I believed in you, and you threw it all away." "I know," he said, his eyes welling with tears. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I'm here to try. I've realized how much I took you for granted, how much you mean to me." Elena shook her head, her voice breaking. "It's not that simple. You don't just get to walk back into my life and expect things to go back to the way they were. I loved you, Daniel. I gave you everything and you broke me." Her words cut deep, but Daniel knew she was right. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "I just wanted you to know that I see now how much I hurt you. And I'm so sorry." Elena turned away, tears streaming down her face. "I can't do this right now, Daniel. I can't." Back in the city, Daniel knew he had to face Sophia next. If Elena had been his foundation, Sophia had been the one who had built him into the man he was today. He owed her the truth, no matter how painful it was. Sophia was sitting in her office when he arrived, her usual air of confidence replaced by a cold, distant demeanor. She didn't look up when he knocked and entered. "What do you want, Daniel?" she asked, her tone icy. "To make things right," he said, standing in front of her desk. "I know I hurt you, Sophia. I lied to you, and I betrayed your trust. But I need you to know that it wasn't because I didn't care. I do. You mean so much to me." Sophia looked up, her eyes sharp. "Then why? Why did you string me along while keeping another woman in your life? Why didn't you tell me the truth from the beginning?" "Because I was a coward," Daniel admitted. "I was too scared to let go of my past, and too selfish to let you go. I thought I could keep both of you in my life, but all I did was hurt the two women I care about most." Sophia stood, her hands gripping the edge of the desk. "You're damn right you did. I gave you everything, Daniel. I believed in you, supported you, and you made me look like a fool." "I know," he said, his voice breaking, "and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. I just needed to tell you how sorry I am. You didn't deserve this, Sophia. You're an incredible woman, and I'll always be grateful for everything you did for me." Sophia's expression softened for a moment, but she quickly masked it. "Apologies don't fix what you broke, Daniel. I don't hate you, but I can't trust you anymore. And without trust, there's nothing left." For weeks, Daniel lived in solitude, grappling with the consequences of his actions. Both women had made it clear that words weren't enough. If he truly wanted to make amends, he had to show them that he had changed. He started by supporting Elena from afar. He sent her funds anonymously to expand her sewing business, knowing she would never accept them directly from him. He also began volunteering at a local nonprofit organization, using his skills to mentor young men who were struggling to find their path, just as he had once struggled. With Sophia, he stepped away from her company, resigning from the position she had helped him achieve. He wanted her to know that he wasn't trying to hold onto her out of convenience or guilt. Both women noticed his efforts, but neither reached out. Daniel knew he couldn't rush their forgiveness. All he could do was hope that, one day, they would see that he was no longer the man who had hurt them. Time passed, and Daniel's life remained quiet and reflective. He hadn't reached out to Elena or Sophia since his attempts to apologize. Instead, he worked tirelessly to rebuild his character, hoping that his actions would speak louder than his words. But forgiveness wasn't something he could control. It was a choice that both women would have to make on their own terms. Elena's sewing shop had grown since Daniel's departure. The anonymous funds had allowed her to purchase new equipment and expand her space, but she couldn't help but suspect who the benefactor was. Deep down, she knew it had to be Daniel. Her heart was a battlefield. Every time she thought about him, memories of their love and his betrayal collided in her mind. She still loved him, she couldn't deny that. But she also couldn't forget the pain he had caused. One rainy evening, Elena sat by her window, holding the last letter Daniel had written her years ago. She traced the words with her fingers, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'll come back for you. Just give me a little more time." The sound of her phone buzzing broke her thoughts. It was her friend Lily. "Elena, you need to hear this," Lily said, her voice excited. "Daniel's been volunteering at that nonprofit I told you about. He's been mentoring kids, helping them get off the streets. I think he's really changed." Elena's breath hitched. She didn't know what to say. "Are you going to forgive him?" Lily asked after a moment of silence. "I don't know," Elena whispered. "I don't know if I can." The question lingered in her mind for days. She thought about the man Daniel had been. The dreamer, the fighter, the man who had loved her deeply. She thought about the man he had become. The liar, the betrayer. And she thought about the man he seemed to be trying to become now. Finally, she made her decision. Sophia was sitting in her office late one evening, staring out at the city skyline. Life had gone on for her after Daniel's betrayal. She had buried herself in work, climbing higher in her career than ever before. From the outside, she seemed untouchable, but inside, she still felt the sting of his lies. She had heard about Daniel's efforts to make amends. Mutual friends had mentioned his work at the nonprofit, how he had stepped away from her company to prove that he wasn't using her. Part of her admired him for it, but another part of her remained skeptical. People don't change that easily, she told herself. But late at night, when the world was quiet, her thoughts betrayed her. She remembered the man Daniel had been. The way he had looked at her like she was the most powerful woman in the world. The way he had believed in her dreams as much as she had believed in his. One evening, she found herself sitting in her living room, a glass of wine in her hand. She stared at her phone, debating whether to call him. She didn't know if she could forgive him, but she also didn't know if she could move on without at least hearing his side one last time. Finally, she made her decision. Elena's visit. Elena showed up unannounced at the nonprofit where Daniel worked. She found him sitting on the floor with a group of teenagers, showing them how to draft designs for a project they were working on. When he saw her, he froze. "Elena," he said softly, standing up. "I've been hearing about what you've been doing," she said, her voice steady. "The mentoring, the donations." "Why?" Daniel swallowed hard. "Because I wanted to be better. I wanted to make up for the hurt I caused you, for the promises I broke." Elena looked at him for a long moment, her emotions warring within her. "You shattered me, Daniel," she said, her voice breaking. "You left me waiting for years, holding on to hope that you would come back. And when you didn't, I had to learn how to pick up the pieces of my life without you." "I know," he said, his eyes glistening with tears. "And I'll never forgive myself for what I did to you. But I want you to know that I never stopped loving you. Not for a second." Elena's eyes filled with tears, but she didn't let them fall. "Love isn't just words, Daniel. It's actions. It's keeping your promises. I don't know if I can trust you again, but I see that you're trying. And that means something." She took a deep breath, her voice softening. "I can't promise anything right now, but maybe, someday we can find a way to move forward, together or apart." Daniel nodded, understanding. It wasn't a full forgiveness, but it was a start. Later that evening, Daniel's phone rang. When he saw Sophia's name on the screen, his heart skipped a beat. "Hello," he answered cautiously. "I've been hearing about what you've been doing," Sophia said, her tone unreadable. Daniel exhaled. "I'm trying to make things right. For you, for Elena, for myself." Sophia was silent for a moment. "You hurt me, Daniel. You made me believe that we had something real, and then you tore it apart. But I've been thinking. Maybe part of me knew you weren't fully mine to begin with." "I'm so sorry, Sophia," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For everything." She sighed. "I don't know if I can ever trust you again, but I'm proud of the man you're trying to become. And maybe that's enough for now." Daniel didn't expect either woman to forgive him fully, but their words gave him hope. Forgiveness wasn't immediate. It was a process. And as he continued his journey, he realized that the most important forgiveness he needed was his own. He had been torn between two incredible women, but now, his focus was on becoming the man they both deserved, whether or not they chose to stand by his side in the end. Weeks turned into months, and Daniel dedicated himself to his work at the nonprofit, finding solace in helping others rebuild their lives. The teenagers he mentored became a reflection of his younger self, lost, desperate, but full of potential. Seeing them grow gave him a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years. Despite his efforts, he couldn't escape the memories of Elena and Sophia. Every night, he replayed their words, their heartbreak, and the way they had walked out of his life. He knew he had no right to ask for a second chance from either of them, but deep in his heart, he couldn't stop hoping. One evening, as he sat alone in his small apartment, Daniel received an unexpected email. It was from Elena. Elena's letter. The subject line read, "Closure." "Daniel, I've thought a lot about everything you said, about the man you were and the man you're trying to become. You were my first love, and you'll always hold a piece of my heart. But love isn't enough when trust is broken. I gave so much of myself to you, and I lost a part of who I was in the process. I've been working to find that part of myself again. You taught me about love and sacrifice, but you also taught me the importance of loving myself. I can't go back to what we had, Daniel. Too much has changed. But I want you to know that I forgive you. Not for your sake, but for mine. Carry that forgiveness with you, and use it to be better. For yourself and for others. Goodbye, Daniel." Elena. Tears rolled down Daniel's face as he read the letter. He knew this was her way of letting go, of freeing herself from the pain he had caused. And though it broke his heart, he was grateful. Elena had given him the gift of closure. A gift he didn't deserve but desperately needed. 2 weeks later, Daniel received a knock on his door. When he opened it, he found Sophia standing there, her arms crossed and her expression unreadable. "Sophia," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Can I come in?" she asked. He stepped aside, his heart pounding. She walked into the apartment and looked around, noting the simplicity of the space. "I've been thinking," she began, turning to face him. "About everything. About us." Daniel swallowed hard. "Sophia, She held up a hand, silencing him. "Let me finish. You hurt me, Daniel. You broke something I thought was unbreakable. And I don't know if I can ever love you the same way again. But I see the man you're trying to be now, and that man deserves a second chance." Daniel's eyes widened. "Are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm willing to try," she interrupted. "But don't mistake this for forgiveness. Forgiveness takes time, and trust takes even longer. If you're serious about this, about us, you're going to have to earn it every single day." "I will," Daniel promised, his voice trembling. "I'll do whatever it takes." Sophia nodded, her expression softening. "We'll see." Daniel found himself standing under the same old tree where he had once made promises to Elena. The town of Maple Creek felt smaller now, quieter. He had returned to say his final goodbye. To the life he had left behind, to the man he once was, and to the woman who had taught him the meaning of sacrifice. He placed a small wooden box at the base of the tree. Inside was everything that reminded him of Elena. The letters she had written, the bracelet she had once sold to help him, and a photo of them from their younger days. "Thank you, Elena," he whispered, his voice breaking. "For everything. I'll never forget you." As he walked away, a sense of peace washed over him. He knew he couldn't change the past, but he could honor it by living a life that made their sacrifices worthwhile. Back in the city, Daniel worked tirelessly to prove himself to Sophia. Their relationship wasn't perfect. There were still moments of doubt and hesitation, but they were building something new, something stronger. One night, as they sat on the balcony of her penthouse, looking out over the city lights, Sophia leaned her head on his shoulder. I don't know what the future holds, she said softly, but I think we're finally headed in the right direction. Daniel nodded, tears filling his eyes. For the first time in years, he felt hope, a fragile, beautiful hope that maybe, just maybe, he could find redemption.